Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel. As a general working title for this video, I'm going to put it under the heading of USA, the Faithless Friend, because I think this is the joining thread in all the various elements of the things that I'm going to mention in this talk today. First of all, in the 2 weeks since I last uploaded, it would be fair to say both that quite a lot has happened and B, that nothing very much has happened. And that simply comes down to interpretation, you may say, or it may simply reflect that there's been a lot of activity, a lot of talk, a lot of hysteria, but not very much actual action or results on the ground. Uh, Certainly, I'm thinking here specifically on the Eastern Europe situation. The US and the UK have been screaming ever louder about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. The date was set for Wednesday the 16th, which was yesterday at the time of recording. I believe some people were saying 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. was the start time. Well, that time has been and gone by more than 24 hours. There was no invasion. There is no sign of any invasion. Um, if assuming that the placement of Russian troops on the border is largely a fiction, the Russians played along by saying we're removing these imaginary troops, and the US has responded by saying no, you're adding more imaginary troops. Quite surreal. Absolutely bizarre, to be honest. What can you say? People playing games, but there is, I think, some genuine events which is unfolding, and this has been pointed out by other commentators, which is that the Ukraine is now visibly starting to fall apart, and we're seeing that happen quite plainly in front of our eyes. And despite, I must say, other sterling efforts of Ukrainian President Zelensky to present a solid, unified and dignified front, really, I can't fault him on that. But he is utterly let down by the wretches and scoundrels that surround him, both at home and abroad. One thing has come to the fore very, very clearly, and that is the Ukraine is on its own. Other commentators have said this. I've seen the evidence they presented. I've seen the evidence I'm reading other sources. I have to agree with them. The Ukraine is on its own. They're not going to get any help from NATO, active help, participation, defence from NATO. They're not being invited to join NATO for all the talk there. There's no invitation on the table. It's not coming. Zelensky is basically begging them to give because he knows what comes next. And in fact, his so-called friends and allies are pulling out as fast as they can. The embassies are leaving Kiev, many of them leaving the Ukraine altogether, some relocating to Lvov. But in addition to elderly foreign troops are leaving, and in addition to this, also I hear reports that the leaders of the Ukraine itself, the oligarchs, are leaving the country or have not been in the country some time and have no intention of coming back. So the people that pull the strings are leaving. Government ministers are certainly leaving Kiev. MPs are leaving Kiev, and they're causing all sorts of difficulty. A general withdrawal from the main bulk of the country by the political and leadership class to their last nationalist holdout in the glacier around the Lvov region in the far west of the country. And this, I think, does indicate a future course of action, which is pretty easy to to predict, knowing that there's going to be no help whatsoever. Um, it's going to be very demotivating for the Ukrainian army to go onto a suicide mission that will achieve absolutely nothing against a population that really doesn't want them there to defend them as well, certainly in the east and south of the country. I think as the things start to fall apart and the Ukrainian army starts to fall back, you will see more regional militias in the strongly Russian-speaking areas take control of areas. I'm sure that Mr. Putin and the Kremlin have been working very hard to ensure that these people are in place and able to act, have the means and the resources with which to do so. And you will see a balkanization of large parts of the Ukraine just leaving that western rump, extending whatever in the very un-Russian areas, those that want to remain Ukrainian for all intents and purposes, but large parts of the east, substantial parts of the centre, most of the south, possibly even Kiev itself, who knows, may very well find itself in areas that are under Russian influence. Now, whether or not as a result of that we then see the Russian army formally moving in to ensure order, to support a line, or simply these areas are then invited, as was the Crimea, to hold referendums and to join the Russian Federation itself, remains to be seen. That's moving ahead of things quite dramatically, but I think that is the sort of final destination that this process is definitely heading for. So despite all the fine words, all the threats, all the dire warnings, all the hysteria, at the end of the day, the United States is not prepared to lift a finger. And it doesn't look as though they're going to get their cancellation of Nord Stream 2 either, which is something that they are very keen to get. Probably planning what we could call a scorched earth policy of just leaving everything a mess in the Ukraine and then trying to do a scorch, and then trying to cancel Nord Stream 2 so that there's a bit of a mess in Europe as well, causing a disruption there to another potential power challenger to US, the American hegemonic position. I don't think they're going to get it, because I don't think they're going to get a Russian invasion. I think you'll see a graduated thing, militias that are definitely locals, holding a line against what rump of basically delineating a final genuine contact border between Ukrainian parts and Russian parts, and eventually over time Russian forces, Russian interior troops, military police, whatever, moving in order to keep calm in these areas and to help enforce that boundary, so it becomes a settled border in due course, but nothing that could be described but under the guise of a peacekeeping mission, and we'd probably say CSTO peacekeeping mission sent into these areas of the Ukraine by the invitation of the local leaders in order to maintain stability in those areas, a million miles away from a aggressive military invasion, which is what the United States has been trying to get people to believe in all this time. Sorry about that, I had a bit of a little difficulty here myself. This, of course, is largely to do with America. It's just also worth pointing out as well that another story bubbling away in the background is the investigation of Special Investigator John Durham in the United States, who is uncovering incredible stories of hacking by the Clinton camp, and specifically one Mr. Jake Sullivan, currently National Security Secretary, whatever his name, his title is in the United States, and somebody who's doing the most to hype up the Russian threat story at the moment. They've been caught hacking, basically, Mr. Trump when he was a candidate and president, and that includes hacking into into the Oval Office of the White House itself. This is a serious allegation, if true, and these are specially investigated. These aren't just allegations. This is evidence provided by a special investigator presented to court. I think this is a story that is going to become more prominent in the not too distant future. Not surprisingly, those members in the current Biden administration that are caught up in this are doing everything they can to ensure that people are talking about anything other. So we shall see. So anyway, that is the situation in Eastern Europe as we speak today with the Ukraine. No invasion, but a very clear withdrawal and abandonment by the West, and indeed many of the Ukraine's own leaders of large parts of the country, and the likelihood of a balkanized breakup into which Russia will be able to insert itself and ultimately take control in a non-invasion way, put it that way. But this story does have a spillover for China. It is, after all, SampanViking on China. Russia and China, the great allies of the new 21st century. And again, you have to shake your head at the American strategy here, and just wonder at their total lack of self-awareness of the arguments they've been using against Russia, putting these arguments, even under the basis of not international law, on their own international rules-based order. You, all China now has to do is to play exactly the same card against the Americans in the Pacific region. And if China now turn around and say America is planning to invade China, by which they are talking about the placement of US forces on the island of Taiwan, they have exactly the same scenario that they can play. The difference being these forces unleashed by this scenario, as we've seen unleashed in the Ukraine, will play to China's favor, because the instability that this causes on the target territory will be targeted against the independence forced government, base government, or the pro-independence government on the island of Taiwan. So all they have to say now is that, look, the Americans have assembled a vast maritime armada on our maritime borders. Many of these ships brought in from other side of the world, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Indian Ocean, far away from what's normally in the Pacific, exactly as the Americans have been saying about the Russians. And now they are in a position where they could invade Chinese sovereign territory at any time, and threaten to take dire measures, countermeasures, if this was the case. Just as the Ukraine has been caught in the gravity of two great powers and is in the process of being pulled apart, so will Taiwan. Once the effect on its ability to raise finance for itself as a government and its companies will fall through the floor, as we've seen in the Ukraine. The threat of war or preventative action, because China is the sovereign master of Taiwan. They can use this as the pretext to occupy the island with their own forces to prevent an invasion by America of Chinese sovereign territory. The Americans have opened a total can of worms, and it is interesting to speculate that as the Eastern European situation reaches a crescendo and then ultimately will start to wind down in the political media sense, if not necessarily the actual events in the ground starting to happen, then the focus will then shift to the Pacific, Asia Pacific region, and again a rerun of a similar story. I can see that across the states of Taiwan, producing exactly the same effect, but in the same way as the Ukraine gambit worked totally against the US's interest, the same gambit played on Taiwan will play totally into the Chinese interest, because this is just the way that the matter is configured and the way that things are stacked. Well, we shall see what happens. Interesting times. A lot of noise, sound, and fury, and very little to show for it on the surface, but deep cracks opening beneath that surface, and those cracks starting to become visible. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like. If you're not a subscriber to this channel, please do. It's free and it helps the channel to grow. If you would like others to hear what I have to say, please hit the share button. If you would like to leave a comment on this subject or on the channel in general, please leave a comment and I will respond as best I can where it is appropriate. Thank you very much. I hope you join me in the next video.